Hey guys, welcome back to another video. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about why I like Fender guitars more than Gibson. If you've seen many of my other videos, or more specifically the video I uploaded yesterday, in which I was talking about why Gibsons were better than Fenders, you'll know that I am a Gibson guy. So yes, I know, despite the title, I'm not actually saying that either one of these brands are necessarily better than the other. It really just boils down to personal preference at the end of the day. So don't get offended by my opinions, and let's get into it. Hello everybody, I hate to interrupt my own video, but I just want to say, if I reach 1,000 subscribers in 6 days, I will give away a guitar. So spread the word, and maybe you can get a free guitar. Further details will be provided in newer videos. Now back to the show. The first thing that I like Fenders more than Gibsons for is the way they're designed. I think that having a bolt-on neck like this one, unlike a set neck like this, also has its pros and cons. I also talked about why this is a good thing for Gibson in my last video, but watch this one first and then you can go on to watch that one. But with the bolt-on neck design, you're able to unscrew and take off the neck whenever you want. And what that means is that there's basically no limit to all your creativity you can have with these kind of instruments. There's a thing called parts casters in which people basically just build their own Fender instruments just from separate Fender parts. They'll take a Stratocaster body from that guitar and mix it with the Strat neck from a different guitar. And they'll throw in some random electronics and then boom, you have a completely unique guitar. That's a luxury that you just don't get with Gibsons. Gibsons, the way they're built, the only thing you can really do is change out the hardware and change out the pickups, and that's about it. You can't really take off the neck on a Gibson because, well, it's kind of joined to the body permanently. But with the Fender, it's just as simple as unscrewing 4 screws. The next thing I want to talk about why I like Gibson more than Fender is the way the pickups are mounted to the body. With Fenders, Stratocasters specifically, they're mounted directly to the pickguard. And you could buy fully loaded pickguards. So basically, if you don't like your pickups, but you don't want to mess around with too much soldering, you can basically just buy a new pickguard that has all the pickups you want in it, and then solder 1 or 2 things in place, and then boom, you have a completely different sounding guitar. While on Gibsons, I've never seen that with the SG model, and you definitely can't do that with a Les Paul because it's mounted to the body and not the pickguard. Another thing that I like about Fenders is that all price ranges of Fender guitars look exactly the same. With Gibsons, if you buy a Les Paul Tribute or an SG Junior, it's going to look a lot different and be a lot cheaper than if you get a standard or a custom. While if you get a Player Series instrument or a Fender American Professional Series, it's going to look exactly the same. That's one of those things I've never liked about Gibsons, is if you want to buy a Les Paul, but you only have $1,200, you have to buy a cheaper Les Paul, obviously, but that being like a Les Paul Tribute or a Studio, which look nothing like a Les Paul Standard. But a Strat, if your budget is $800, you can buy a nice Player Series, but if you have a higher budget, you can get basically the exact same guitar, just built way nicer. So it's really good for people who have a budget in mind. And since we're talking about budgets, to start off with, Fenders are already cheaper than the majority of Gibsons. Not necessarily these two instruments, both of these retailed for about $1,500 when I got them, but Les Paul is going to run you way more than the Strat of the equivalent value. And speaking of price, they have a lower resale value, which is a good thing and a bad thing. That being said, if you want to sell your Fender guitar, you're probably not going to be able to get as much out of it as with the Gibson. Gibsons tend to hold their value better, but if you're looking to buy a used instrument, you can find a better deal. So if you're a buyer, Fender. If you're a seller, Gibson. And going back to the pickups, let's talk about Fender pickups. Fenders typically have a much better tone for clean, and that's due to the pickups used. Most Fenders have single coil pickups, while most Gibsons come with humbucker pickups. Fenders definitely have a bit more twang to them, while Gibsons just don't have that same life when it comes to the snappy feel to them, which is one of those things where it's just personal preference, but I love guitars that have a good twang feeling to them. That's actually why I like my Gibson Gold Top up there, because it has a lot of twang to it, and actually so does this SG, but my Les Paul Custom doesn't have that snappy feel to it like all of the Fenders I have ever played have. It's one of those things you just kind of have to try it out and see if you like it, but I love that feeling of a snappy feeling string. And it's probably due to the longer scale length that is on a Fender instrument. The scale length is the distance from the nut all the way to the bridge here. It's all of the distance that's playable on your guitar. And Gibsons have a shorter scale length, that being 24 3/4, while Fenders, I believe, have 25 1/4 or 25 1/2. That makes bending easier on a Gibson instrument because the points of contact are closer together, while a little bit harder on a Fender, but I think having that resistance to the instrument makes it feel a little bit more rewarding, if that makes any sense. It doesn't really make any sense, but it's just one of those things you have to try out. Try out the longer scale length, try out the shorter scale length. I do think a longer scale length does feel really well, though. Feels really good, though. Really well, though. Feels really good, though. I don't know what I'm saying. Another thing that gives Fenders a leg up, specifically with Stratocasters, Jazzmasters, instruments like those, maybe not a Telecaster, but they're typically way more comfortable than the most Fender or Gibson instruments. I'm going to exclude the SG because the SG is a very comfortable guitar, but a Les Paul just isn't as comfortable. If you look at the sides here, this is where your stomach kind of lays whenever you're playing guitar. And if you look in the Fender here, it has this nice little bevel here for your belly. It kind of holds your body. It's very nice. While on a Gibson, there is no comfort carve there, so it's basically just a harsh corner that goes right into your gut. And that, for obvious reasons, isn't the most comfortable. Also, Fender instruments, based on what wood they use in their construction, are usually a lot lighter. This Les Paul is over 11 pounds, which is very heavy for a Les Paul, don't get me wrong, but this Strat is closer to 5 to 7 pounds. And trust me, when you're playing a show, you definitely start to feel the weight of your guitar, especially when you're up there for 30-40 minutes. So having a lighter guitar is definitely good for something like that. One of the things that I talked about that's a good thing for Gibson is also just a preference thing, but Gibsons have fret nibs, and that can be a good thing or a bad thing. Yes, you can't feel the metal side of the fret, but these fret nibs are very fragile sometimes. While with a Fender instrument, there's no chance of those fret nibs breaking off because they don't have fret nibs. And especially if you're buying a Fender, the edges of the fret are going to feel nice. They're going to take the time to make sure you have a good quality in playing instrument. That way, you're not going to stab yourself with the edge of a fret. Maybe on some of those cheaper Squires, you might run into the fact that the edges of the frets are much more uncomfortable, but on a nice Fender instrument, you're not going to have that issue. All of the edges of the frets are going to feel nice. I do prefer fret nibs, but they can break, and it's not an easy repair, nor is it a cheap repair. Another great thing about Fenders is they have the option to have maple fretboards, like this one here. If you've never played a guitar with a maple fretboard, it feels so smooth compared to this one has ebony, which also feels very smooth, or that one there, which has rosewood. Something about a nice glossy maple fretboard is so smooth to play. And they give you the option to also get rosewood, so if you prefer the feeling of rosewood, you can get pretty much any Fender instrument with a rosewood board instead of a maple board. And the last thing, and honestly the most important thing about Fenders and why they're better than Gibsons, is they're more versatile. The Fender Telecaster, which unfortunately I don't have, is one of the most versatile guitars there is. And with the Les Paul here, yes, there are basically infinite tones on both. It's a lot easier to dial in a much more different tone on a Strat than a Les Paul. With a Les Paul, you only have 2 knobs per pickup and a 3-way selector switch. While on a Stratocaster here, you have a 5-way selector switch and 1 master volume with 2 tones. And this specific model of Strat has a push-push pot, and what this pot does is it adds the neck pickup into whatever combination you have. So there are many more tones you can get out of a Fender instrument, maybe with a little bit less gain, but there's many more tones you can get out of a Strat or a Telecaster rather than some of these Gibson instruments, which aren't as well versatile as the Fender counterparts. And that's about it for this video, but I do have one more point. This isn't something I've ever had issues with, which is why I'm not going to include it in this video, but Fenders typically have better tuning stability than Gibsons, but I've never had any issues with my tuning stabilities on any of the Gibsons I've ever owned or played. So that's why I haven't really included in this video, but the general verdict is that Fenders stay in tune better. So keep that in mind when making your choice. But that is why Fenders are better than Gibsons. Like I said, I am a Gibson guy, and I do prefer Gibsons, but that's just because they speak to me more. One brand isn't really actually better than the other. It just comes down to personal preference, like I mentioned in the beginning of the video. But with that, that wraps it up. If you guys liked this video, feel free to click like. And if you loved it and you want to see more content from me, subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.